Hello pushers, welcome to Pushing Cardboard 38. This episode I have an interview with Paul Hederer, a first-time designer with a new game on the Romanian front in World War I, coming soon from VUCA. I'll also be looking at Right, Fierce and Terrible. It's a game on the naval battle of Sluys in 1340 by Jerry White and featured in a back issue of Against the Odds magazine. And I have another game overview. Dance of War by Three Crown Games is a chit pull hex encounter game on the first Battle of El Alamein. So, lots to get through, and I'm looking forward to it. Before we go, though, this episode is sponsored by Noble Knight Games. If there's a game you need, they've got it. They are a treasure trove of out-of-print games you've probably given up hope of finding. I encourage you to try them out. And if you do, please use the link found in either the newsletter or on the website. That way I'll get a little kickback and be able to feed my addiction. And then I'll tell you about it. It's a win-win. News. A new Compass Kickstarter caught my eye this time. Pontiac's War, Frontier Rebellion, 1763 to 66. I'm a little leery of designer John Paniski after my most recent game from him, Flanks of Gettysburg, but the topic got me. I haven't pledged yet, but I'm still thinking about it. I probably will. Speaking of crowdfunding, Shakos has a new one coming up. Rex Britannorum, yeah, that's it. Romans in Britain. The info I got on the game says it's 1 to 5 players, but the current cover art says 1 to 3, and that's what the BGG page says, so I'm going to go with that, 1 to 3 players. Shaco's games are always worth checking out. Some are a bit light for me, but most of them fit right in the wheelhouse for a great game that can be played in an evening. The 2024 Summit Award nominees have been announced. There's a full press release on the website, but for those of you anxious for the news, the nominees are Halls of Hegra, designed by Peter Schanke Olsen, published by Tompit Games. Land and Freedom, The Spanish Revolution and Civil War, designed by Alex Knight and published by Blue Panther. The British Way, Counterinsurgency at the End of Empire, designed by Stephen Rangazis, published by GMT. And We Are Coming Nineveh, designed by Harrison Brewer, Rex Brynan, Juliet Lemenahazi, and Brian Train, published by Nuts Publishing. So check that out. There's, as always, there's links on the website, links in the show notes, links in the newsletter for all these things. Sergio Schiavi of Dissimula has posted 2 shorter scenarios for his game 1943-1945, The Soft Underbelly. This game is not a long one when played in full, so these should be quite short, as they're only a 3-turn and a 5-turn scenario, I think. I tried my hand at a quick and dirty 1-turn playthrough video of Dance of War, which I'll be talking about later. Check it out, it's on my YouTube channel. I'm trying to gauge interest in this sort of playthrough. I don't think I'd ever have the patience to do a full game playthrough, but this format of 1 or 2 turns, maybe that'll be something I can do going forward. My only other news is that I will shortly be at San Diego HistCon. I've got games lined up with Zilla Blitz as well as the Players Aids Grant, and I think I've got 4 interviews lined up as well, so I'll have plenty of fresh content coming up. What's on the table? First, a small update from last time. In Clash of Carriers, the Hornet Task Force managed to fight off that next wave of fighters. She only has 1 cap unit helping, but her AA and the AA of the 4 capital ships around her have managed to degrade the attacks enough to keep her safe. So there you go. New on the table is a real throwback, a game I haven't played in 30-some years, maybe closer to 40. Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, 4th edition, not Advanced Third Reich or any of the Bruce Harper's newer versions, but the real original Third Reich. We're playing via Vassal PBM. I'm the Allies. I gotta say, it's all coming back to me in fits and starts, so I'm not totally stuck in the rule book. I'm really digging it. So much of this so far is just so clear and easy. I mean, I'm sure I'll get bogged down when we start with anti-submarine warfare and amphibious landings and whatnot. But as we begin with the invasion of Poland, I'm all in. So I'm glad I get a chance to play this old classic. New games to the collection. Not an alarming number of games this month, but definitely more than I can play before the next batch rolls in. Cowpens 1871 is this issue's game from Ve Victus magazine. I really need to feature one of these in an upcoming episode so everyone can see what their games are like. Highway to the Kremlin, Napoleon's March on Moscow. This was one, I found this used game at my friendly local game store at a good price, so I picked it up. I might have mentioned this one already, who knows. Dance of War and Polar Storm, both from Swedish publisher Three Crown Games. Dance of War I'll talk about later. Polar Storm is about a Russian 1944 offensive to drive the Germans out of Finland. Arctic Disaster, The Destruction of Convoy P-17. This is another ATO game from my friendly local game store. Arnhem, ASL Arnhem 2024. This is just a pack of 4 ASL scenarios celebrating the Market Garden. Blitzkrieg 1940, Hanut Eston. An older game from an offshoot of Vevictus as far as I can tell. I'm not sure really what the deal is with this, but anyway, I got it on sale from GMT, so I thought I'd check it out, and I'm really into France 40 stuff at the moment. Doomed Battalions, ASL Module 11. So this is my last missing core module. Yeah, I'm an addict. What are you going to do about it? And finally, Radetzky's March, The Road to Novara. This is a promo copy I got from Sergio Schiavi's game from Dissimula in Italy. This is I think it's sort of a remake. He'd already done a game called Radetzky's March, but it had a different subtitle. I think he's reworked the game, maybe changed the map a little bit, maybe changed the units. It's not just an update. This is, I think there's some new stuff here. So I'm interested to see what's going on. Anyway, given the 3 of the things there in that list I'd pre-ordered, it's not too bad in terms of my addiction this month. Okay, game 1. Right, Fierce, and Terrible. Sluys 1340. Well, many of you will be familiar with Against the Odds magazine. They are a publisher of the classic old strategy and tactics magazine with a complete game inside mode. I've never had a subscription, as it's a bit pricey here in Canada. Actually, I don't even know if they send them, if you can subscribe in Canada. But anyway, I've always bought the issues piecemeal. The advantages of buying them off the shelf would be that they come in a plastic tray, sort of like the old SPI flat packs, rather than the Ziploc packaging that comes in the mailed versions. But truth be told, these trays aren't really that useful, as they have no fitted lid. The map and the rules go on top and then the lid, so unless you store them flat rather than upright, the sorted counters end up spilling all over in the tray anyway. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. Being a part-time ATO buyer, you can't actually subscribe in Canada now that I think about it. I was unaware that they decided to shut down their subscription business. Steve Rawling, the publisher, explains that he's getting on in years, and should anything unexpected happen, he doesn't want to leave the business with outstanding issues owed and no product coming. So they're out of the subscription business, but apparently will go on making the magazines with games in them for the foreseeable future. The closest they'll come to a subscription now is that you can pre-order each new edition. I already had quite a few of their games, but something about this new one, something about this news of them shutting down the subscription model made me want to beef up my collection. I know that makes no sense, but that's what I did. Anyway, they've got a great deal for back issues where you can buy 3 for $100. So I went with that. And then as I let them know that I would be featuring one of their games on Pushing Cardboard, they sent me a promo game as well. So there it is, the perks of podcasting, I guess. All of which is a way to say that today's game was one from that pack of back issues. I did get 2 very new games, but this Sluys game comes from issue 34, published in 2011. If you like what you hear about this game, not to worry, it's still available from ATO as a back issue. Before getting to the game, I might as well talk about the magazine, this issue. There's an editor's column and articles on what's coming up in future issues, but the meat of the magazine starts with an article from editor Andy Nunez on English bowmen in the 100 Years' War. This has a close tie with the Sluys game, as you'll hear later on. In this period, the warships involved had no cannon, but rather tons of bowmen and crossbowmen, and then men-at-arms for boarding and fighting it all out face-to-face. Up next, there was a great article from Right Fierce and Terrible designer Jerry White giving background to his game. Not a simple designer's notes here. This is 13 pages of historical background to the situation, as well as on the mechanics of warfare in this period, and a lesson on period naval warfare. This is better than what you see in many box games in terms of designer's notes, so well worth checking it out. Of course, in the middle of the issue, there's the rules for the game, which you carefully detach and then fold the staples back up so your magazine hangs together. And then longtime game reviewer John Burt gives us a change of pace. Well, a change of pace for 2011, I guess. It's his first book review. It's a book review on Boudicca's Rebellion. It's an Osprey book on Britain's rebelling against Rome in the 1st century AD. And then next up, a detailed look at what we know about navies at the time of Sluys by Ed Heinzman. This looks at things from a slightly different angle than Jerry White's article. Here we're given how navies were constructed, what they cost, how they were organized, and how the crews were paid or not paid, and a fair bit of detail on what we actually know compared to what is conjecture, given the death of primary sources. And then now we come to a few things not directly related to the game in question. We get an article from William Strook on the Egyptian invasion of Israel in 1972, and an article from John Prados, the famous designer, on his Beyond Waterloo game that will appear in an upcoming issue of ATO, of course, long since out, and an article on amphibious warfare for wargamers by Gary Varden. He uses examples from several different games as a background to the topic of amphibious invasions. And then we get an article from Paul Rohrbaugh on the battle for Fort Mercer in the Revolutionary War, an op-ed from Ed Erks on gaming the then-current Arab Spring, and then finally Mark Osted's designer notes for Schwarm, which is a second smaller solo game that's included this issue. I think he co-designed it with Jerry White as well. The player is the German using his fighters to try to bring down attacking American bombers. So a nice little smaller game. You get 2 games in this issue. All taken together, I think you can see why I compared ATO to the old S&T model. But it's now 35 years later, and the production values are quite a bit higher. Full color, and best of all, a larger typeface than those magazines from yesteryear. I really enjoy these magazines. Even if it included a game that falls flat for you, there's still plenty of content. Okay, on to Right, Fierce and Terrible, Sluys 1340 from designer Jerry White. You might know Jerry from his groundbreaking Atlantic chase game, or his many World War II solo air games, the Skies Above series and the Enemy Coast Ahead series, for example. This Sluys game may actually be his first published design. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it came before any of those other big hits that came later. Right, Fierce is a tactical game of this medieval naval battle. The English are outnumbered and forced to attack, but somehow they emerge victorious. None of the various chroniclers of the time agree on exactly how it happened, and that's going to make for some interesting design choices, as we'll see later on. The map is a small bit of an estuary near the Netherlands. There's land on 3 sides, but also 3 sea entrances on 3 sides. Hexes are about an eighth of a nautical mile. There's counters for naval squadrons, both sailed and rowed, for groups of Marines, both men-at-arms and knights, and for a handful of individual leaders. That's about it. The first thing you have to wrap your head around with this battle is it's nothing like what you might be picturing as a naval battle. There's no cannons. The fighting occurs when one squadron grapples another and one side boards the other. As Jerry White puts it, you're sort of creating the battlefield as you play. Each side has 3 commands. A command is simply a group of squadrons. Each squadron will likely have a group of Marines on board and maybe a leader. It's a chit-pull game, but with a little room for variability, as only 5 of the 6 commands will be activated each turn. The mechanics here are simple and enjoyable. You draw a chit, the owner activates a command, then there's a series of possible actions. For the activated squadrons, you move, then attempt to ram if you like. Successfully ramming another squadron will damage the enemy and also grapple the rammer to the target, but is risky, as you may fail and damage your own squadron and not grapple the enemy. And then there's the archery segment. The English have the advantage here, as they have longbowmen compared to the French crossbows. The English are allowed to fire at adjacent squadrons, while the crossbows may only fire at units in the hex they are currently in melee with, or they can fire at adjacent squadrons if they are grappled to them. Archery doesn't do huge damage, but it can cause a step loss to either the enemy Marines or the squadron. An interesting part of the archery mechanic is that some types of squadrons have something called castles on board. This is the origin of words like forecastle or forecastle. They're literally elevated firing platforms for the archers, but also somewhat fortified and give the owner a place to pack more men in on each ship. Castle ratings serve as a defensive dice roll modifier in the archery phase. And then we get down to the nitty-gritty. We have segments to attempt to grapple adjacent squadrons, to board successfully grappled squadrons, and finally for melee on boarded squadrons. Melee combat can be fairly swingy. Once you've boarded a squadron, to melee, you add the melee factors of both the Marines you've sent over as well as the melee factor of the squadron you've grappled the enemy with. If you have multiple squadrons grappled to a single enemy, you can use them all in a single attack. Once both sides have totaled their melee factors in the combat, they each roll 2 dice, and this is why it can be a bit swingy. In order to really ensure that you have a good chance of success, you're going to need an overwhelming number of forces, not easy to muster, I should say. Each side adds its 2d6 roll to its melee factor and total it up, and then the side with the higher total wins. The winner loses a single step, and the loser loses a step off every unit involved. If the winner wins by a more than 2-to-1 margin, the winner loses nothing, and the loser loses 2 steps off everything. Although there's one caveat, a squadron can never lose its second and final step in melee. If you manage to eliminate all the Marines on one of their squadrons, that squadron is now captured and can be used by you. But it can also be liberated by its original owner and maybe liberated by you again, and so on and so forth, back and forth. Once all the melees are done, activated Ords squadrons, as opposed to sailed squadrons, get a small maneuver segment where they can move a single hex or attempt to ram or grapple. And then it's on to the next chit. Once all 5 chits are played, there's a couple of short end turn phases. The first is the sally phase. This is interesting. This is a phase where all units may get a chance at archery, then boarding, and then melee. But it's not guaranteed to happen. In the sally phase, first we have the archery. Both sides roll a die, and the higher roll goes first. They can fire any archers they have that have available targets, but only at same hex targets this time. No long. The die roll is a tie. The whole sally phase ends immediately, and neither side fires, boards, or melees. None of that. Straight to the end phase. But if the archery phase happens, then it's the boarding phase. Again, we roll for initiative, and again, if it's a tie, we stop, go to the end turn. If not, the winner makes his boarding moves, all that they want, and then the loser makes theirs. And then the melee portion, once again, an initiative roll, ties anything again, but otherwise the winner conducts desired melees first, and then the loser. And then finally, it's the little bit of the end turn segment. Here we check for a morale collapse. More on that later. Each side can rally 1 step for 1 step each for 1 to 4 units, depending on the board state. We check for fires aboard ships. We check for changes in the wind and the current, and then we refill the chit cup and we start it all again. So what about that collapse check? Both sides will start with 17 morale points. You gain or lose morale whenever a squadron is captured, liberated, or sunk. Whenever a knight is eliminated, they have 4 steps, so it takes a while. And whenever leaders are captured, killed, or liberated, also morale is gained or lost. The morale points for morale loss are more prevalent than for morale gain, so both sides will slowly have the morale lowered. Once your morale is below 6, you have to roll a die at the end of each turn, and if you roll higher than your current morale, you have collapsed and lost the game, and that's it. There's a bit of chrome and a couple of optional rules, but that's the game in a nutshell. It's really like a land battle, but the land is bridged over the water only where the ships are grappled together. And I should have noted that you can also attempt to ungrapple as well so that you can maneuver again. One important rule here is that the French can chain 2 squadrons together, allowing them to stack 2 squadrons in a hex, and therefore giving them a much higher melee value. This sort of offsets the English longbow advantage. One final thing that makes this package interesting. As mentioned earlier, medieval chroniclers disagree as to how it all unfolded. Some were writing later and basing their accounts on word of mouth, and I don't think any of them were actually there at the site. So we have quite a few variations on how it happened. And then quite a few modern historians as well who've tried to boil all the different accounts down to what might have really happened. So, while the map and the units stay the same, Jerry White gives us 7 different scenarios to try, each reflecting different interpretations of the history. So the English may start out on one side or the other, or both. The French may start chained up or not. Either side could have the wind advantage at start. Lots of different variations. The French may start out in line or in a more disorganized arrangement. I've only played a couple of them, but as you might expect, they played it very differently. I expect some will definitely favor one side or the other. There's no mention of whether one or more of them is thought to be balanced, but I guess you'll find that out in the playing. I'm quite happy with this issue of ATO. The game is terrific, and the accompanying articles are a huge bonus. I can't really compare it to anything else I've played, as this is definitely the first naval game I've played that was more like a land battle on floating barges. If this interests you at all, I'd grab a copy from Against the Odds before it sells out. One more thing. While I was writing this, I was made aware that Volko Runke did an extensive session report on the game for the the Board Game Chronicle website. It's really worth checking out if you're interested in the game. I'll have a link to it in the usual places. Okay, before moving on to our other featured game, let's listen to my interview with Paul Hederer. Paul is a new designer, and his first game is 1916 Romania, Prelude to Blitzkrieg, soon to be available from VUCA. I spoke with Paul long distance at his home in Switzerland. Here's our conversation. I'm happy to be speaking today with Paul Hederer, designer of the upcoming 1916 Romania Prelude to Blitzkrieg from VUCA Games. Welcome, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks, Grant, for giving me a chance to talk about the game. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to have you. People on the podcast, they know that I'm in Calgary by now, but I'm talking to you in Switzerland. But you're not Swiss. You're an American. What brings you to Switzerland?
Well, yeah, that's correct. So I grew up in Idaho, as we talked about. So and I joined the military when I was 18, and I went overseas. I spent a lot of time in Europe, and eventually, in one of my stays, I met my future wife, and we got married. And so when I retired, I stayed in 22 years in the Air Force. I stayed in Europe, and we lived in Germany for about 10 years outside of Frankfurt. And then we wanted to see what Switzerland was like and take the opportunity to move here. And that's how a boy from Idaho ended up in Switzerland. It was about the last thing I would have ever thought if you talked to me, 30 years ago. So
yeah, right. Well, good. I've always wanted to visit Switzerland. It seems like a really unique place. But you were in the Air Force for 22 years. I wasn't sure which arm of the services. When you were in the Air Force, did you do much wargaming then? Was that something you and your pals did in your off time?
It's a really good question. Actually, it was interesting. So when I went to basic training, I boxed up all my games at home. I had quite a few games at that time, mostly SPI, Avalon Hill from that time period.
Yeah.
And I boxed them up because I went to the language school in Monterey, California, and actually learned Arabic. And so the washout rate was about 70%. And this was at the absolute height of the Dungeons and Dragons phase. And we had so many students who failed out that they even considered banning it from the barracks. They said maybe they would get rid of it. And so I made kind of a vow to myself that that first year I wouldn't play any games at all. So I left them at home. And then later, when I got overseas, I was so busy qualifying and getting into my job and everything. I really took a hiatus for, I know you're going to be shocked, for about 20 years.
Well, it's a common story.
Yeah, and so I went to school. I got my university degree. I got married. So the trifecta of career, family, and school took a big toll on gaming. But I got back into it around 2011 or 12. So about 12 years ago, I came back in.
Right, but by that time, were you out of the Air Force then?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I retired
Yeah.
in 2006, and then I was in government service for about 8 or 9 years before I came to Switzerland. Yeah.
So your wargaming history is that classic one of maybe you get into it in high school and a little bit out of, as soon as you get a wife, a career, and a family, it goes on hold. Once your family's grown and your career's a little more settled, it's 20 years later and you're back into it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the story. I met a few war gamers when I was in the service. In fact, one of my COs, one of our colonels, had one or two games in my dorm room when I was still living in the dorms, and he saw it when they came in. They inspected the dorms, once every 6 months or something, and he saw him and he's like, "Hey, you're a war gamer too. We'll have to get together for a game." But of course, we never really did. That wouldn't have been so appropriate. But I did meet a few war gamers, but I also met some war gamers even when I was a government civilian. That was kind of interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
from those early games, like before you came back in 2011, because I'm an old time gamer as well, so I'm always interested to hear from those Avalon Hill SPI days, what was your favorite game?
That's a good question.
Or if it's two or three, go ahead. But
okay. Well, we played a lot of war in Europe. and of course that was a big, massive
The big
game.
one, yeah.
And a friend of ours, we were really lucky. He had a ping pong table. We set it up on there, and then his parents allowed us to keep it set up in his house. And we played three full games of that. And so that was a real favorite. I liked Great War in the East, the quad, because I was interested in World War One at that point as well. And really at that point, there wasn't anything on the Eastern Front for the First World War. And I like To the Green Fields Beyond from SPI as well. And then, but then also some of the more classic ones, like I was a big Squad Leader player.
Yeah, me too.
Avalon Hill, yeah. And so I still have all my games. I haven't played Squad Leader, I would probably say, in 30 years. But every time I walk by and I see it, it still brings back a lot of good memories.
So you played a bunch of Squad Leader way back in the day, but you didn't progress onto Advanced Squad Leader.
Well, actually, I did during the pandemic because one of my local gamer friends here is a big ASL player. And I have to be honest with you, I tried it and I really felt overwhelmed with it. I really gave it the old school try during the pandemic. I mean, there wasn't a lot else to do in the initial phase of the pandemic. We weren't set up to work from home. So we had about a month where we weren't really working at all. And
Right.
then we kind of transitioned online like millions or tens of millions of other people. And when I got busy again, it was something I kind of let drop again. I have to say I didn't catch the ASL bug.
Yeah, well, probably saved your wallet a good chunk of money then.
A little bit. It still took a chunk out of it, but yeah, I really wanted to try it and like it, but the rules are just so extensive. And
Yeah, I've always found for ASL, if you have somebody who can gently teach it to you rather than having to go through that big book, because the big book is, I think, the best reference rule book in wargaming, but it's maybe the worst teaching book in wargaming. So, and rule books kind of have to be one or the other, or you need two different things. So when you got back into gaming in 2011 or so, what kind of things did you start playing?
That's also a really good question. So it was really interesting for me because I had been out of the community for so long to come back in, and then I was quite surprised at the number of World War One games I found. I was really, really surprised. So I think the first game that I bought when I started again was Mike Resch's Twilight in the East. So I started on the deep end with complexity and stuff. But that was definitely one of the first games that I bought and started playing. I really have to say played. And I got involved in Mike's games. I played Twilight in the East, and then I played Offensive Outrance, and that's where I actually met Mike. We were we played together in Germany at a friend's house, and then I picked up his Serbian game also a little bit later. So mostly, I would say when I got back into it, mostly World War One games. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I sort of feel like Paths of Glory, the card assisted or card-driven game. It Even if people don't like card-driven games, there's something about that game that totally ramped up wargamers' interest in World War One again, which was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I discovered not long ago, I'd missed it way back in the day, but there was SPI, an S&T magazine game just called World War One. That's sort of the whole thing playable in about 2 hours, and simple rules, but I just found it a fantastic game. It was like it's I like big games like you, but sometimes it's nice to have something that you can play in 2 or 3 hours as well. But this this is interesting. So, well, I'll ask, so you started playing all these World War One games because you're interested in World War One. Obviously, what led you to making the shift to becoming a designer?
Wow, that's another good question. You've got a lot of good questions, Fred. Wait, that's a good question. That's what my clients always tell me when they want to buy time. No, I had I'd been in contact with Mike Resch, and he was kind enough to exchanged some emails with me back when I got back into it in a couple of years after I had been playing this game. And I had told him I was always very, very interested in the Romanian campaign. Believe it or not, I've been interested in a long time. It's just something kind of caught my imagination, and he encouraged me. And so I thought that if I could try to design a game that I was hoping I would find a system that I could really attach my game to, or make it, like a part two or a part three, that this was kind of my goal. And so I really wanted to try it because I wanted to see the campaign come alive, because it's only been covered in Der Weltkrieg. I've not played it, I've seen it, but it's not so detailed. But it's definitely a campaign that was important, but it's not been done to the death. It's not like the Battle of the Bulge or
No,
Small.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
it was really your interest in the campaign where you went, the market isn't serving my needs. I have to make my own damn game if I'm gonna
Yeah,
be able to play this campaign.
yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny that you say that, because I've been working on the game for a long time. So I started working on it when I was still living in Germany, when I was working for the government, and I've moved twice since then. I changed careers once, and I've had some times I've really put it down for a longer period of time. I didn't have a publisher. I was working on it, and I remember I posted one time, somebody was saying something about the pictures and everything, and I said, well, it was what I always wanted. I wanted to make a game about the Romanian campaign, and now I have one. And I didn't mean it in a snarky way at all. It was just, that was really kind of my goal when I started, was I wanted to see this come alive, try to figure out why it happened the way it did, what the factors were, and then it kind of just went from there, where there was some interest in it and everything. And I thought along the way, well, maybe I could try to get it published. And there's always actually been quite a bit of interest in it, I have to say.
So how did you get hooked up with VUCA? Those guys are out of Germany. So
Mhm.
did you meet them while you were in Germany, or did this happen later when you're in Switzerland?
No, it happened. It just happened. I have to get it right. It happened last year.
Ah, yeah.
So early last year, actually, I had posted a picture, or an image of the map in the Wargamers art group on Facebook, and I guess Patrick saw it, and he contacted me. He just sent me a chat and said, "Hey, I'd really like to talk to you about publishing your game." And we met online, and I really liked what he had to say. Patrick's
You,
has got a lot of experience as a businessman, and I really appreciated that, because I have kind of dallied a little bit with a couple of other publishers, and there were times where it didn't seem like there was a clear vision for what they wanted to do. And it's not a criticism of anybody or any company in particular, but they're war gamers first, and they're publishing games, where Patrick is a war gamer, but he also has been a successful businessman for many years. And the conversation with him was completely professional, and I was really impressed with him.
yeah, I've spoken to him on my podcast before, and he talked about how he's he set up his business doing non-war game things. He had a whole business doing poker related products, and so
Right.
he basically learned the business of selling games or game related things before he started selling war games. I think that was a great leg up into the business for VUCA.
Yeah. And I think for him, it makes his communications are very professional. He always responds. He's supportive, but he's not smothering in any way. He's not always trying to get involved. He always just asks, "Is there something you need? Is there something I can do for you?" Um, and he's great. I
Do you
just, yeah.
do you do you work with a developer while you're bringing the game in its final stages?
Yeah, the developer, his name is Lionel Martinez. I also met him online. He has been following the kind of the progress of the game over the very long period of time that it's been I've been working on it. and he had posted quite a lot. He was always interested. He was always very supportive, and he does a tremendous amount of playtesting. He playtests the BCS system, for example, so some real mainstream big
Yeah, yeah,
system.
yeah.
And we just kind of got to talking, and I asked him if he would be interested, and he said yeah. So he talked to Patrick, and they kind of made sure, that they had a meeting in the minds and everything was okay. And so we've been working together since I guess about August of last year, um, August or September of last year, um, because there was a system change, and I don't know if you saw that, or
Well,
maybe it's
I had to understand your game is, I don't know if it's totally the knock Paris system, or it takes part of it. Is that the system change you made?
well, so because of my association with Mike and the fact that I like Mike's games, I really like his system a lot. The original version of the game was using Mike Rush's 1914 system rules.
Yeah.
And I worked on that for years. And then I played a small game of Knock Paris, and one of the local gamers here kept telling me, "Oh, you need to try it. You got to try this. You need to try it." And there was a lot of buzz around the game, of course. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it won the Charlie, so there was a lot of buzz about it after that as well, but before. And so we kind of kicked around this idea, and this is a good example of the good communication with Patrick. Um, I just talked to him about it, and we talked about the advantages of maybe making the transition to a different system, which I thought would work. And the huge advantage, of course, if that is that it's a VUCA system. It's not a GMT system.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a VUCA system. And so I talked to Bertrand Mounier, who is the designer for Knock Paris. He was super supportive. He basically did a data dump. He sent me all of his Excel files so that I could take a look at it and see what he had done. And I liked what I saw a lot. And so we made the switch over in about September of last year, to the new system.
That must have been really interesting to go from designing the game in one system, and a system that you obviously really loved. You played 2 or 3 games already in that system, to go, I'm going to use this OOB. I'm going to use this map, but I'm going to totally change the system. I guess it's not a, I mean, there's some things that are going to stay the same, like
Mhm.
the scale's going to stay the same, I imagine, right?
Yeah, it was exactly the same. And so that was it was just an interesting coincidence that the 1914 system, the scale is actually 8 kilometers per hex. And I had done mine at 10 kilometers a hex because the theater's just too big.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to make a game that nobody can put on their table. So I had made it
Thank
10
you.
kilometers. Yeah, yeah, for me too. Um, and so I'd made it 10 kilometers, and it just happened to be that was the same scale that Bertrand had used in his game as well. And making the transition actually went fairly fast. The first maybe 2 or 3 weeks was doing all the number crunching for the order of battle and making the transition, which was actually fairly easy. And then, figuring out the movement points or the movement factors, and how fast everybody could move. Um, and then it kind of got more complicated from there. But that had nothing to do with Bertrand's system as much as with the complexity of this situation. And um, it's one of the big realizations that I've had, is that warfare in 1914 was really, really different than warfare in 1916. And especially warfare on the Western Front in 1914 in the beginning is completely, or not completely different, I don't want to say that, but vastly different than, let's say, warfare here on the Romanian front in 1916. And
Right,
that's taken a lot of time.
right, of course. What's the unit scale of the game? Is it the same as Knock Perry as well?
Yeah, you ask great questions. You always ask great questions. I can think of so many development meetings where we've talked about exactly these issues. And that's one of the complications of it, is it is the same scale. So it's even advertised as brigade and division. But the complication here is, how would I put it? The asymmetry of the size of the units on the different sizes that are confronting each other. So the big thing has been, how do you successfully integrate and show the actions and operations of even a regiment or even a battalion who's defending a section of front, when the other guy on the other side might have brigades, let's say, for example. um, but we had to show it because on this front, so in Nac Paris, let's say, maybe you have two, maybe even three divisions per hex, so each 10 kilometers. And a front in World War One, I would say a front of 2,500 to, yeah, even as small as maybe 2,000 meters. And then for a division and up for a corps, you could have 3 to 5 kilometers or even less is normal. But here you have divisions holding 60 or 80 kilometers in front.
Holy smokes!
Yeah, or even more. The Austrian divisions in the beginning of the game, the 71st division in the south here is holding almost 120 kilometers of front.
So, and what you hinted at, there's a bit of a asymmetry in the size of the divisions, say, on each side. I mean, we see this a little bit in World War II on the East Front. There's and even in American Civil War games, there's the South and the North organize their armies slightly different. So there was a difference in just the manpower of what you might think of as equivalent units. That's got to be a real stumbling block when players just assume a brigade is a brigade, or a division is a division is a division.
Yeah, that's really true, Grant. It's a really good point. And one of the interesting aspects of the game and of this front is the fact that the armies are so different. So you've got a Romanian army that's basically a 1914 army that had upgraded some in 15 and 16, but they have no combat experience other than some of them that fought in the Balkan Wars. But I think they were in the Second Balkan War for like a week or 2 weeks or something like this. You've got the Bulgarians, who basically had been fighting since 1912. They've got these huge divisions, which are basically corps. So they're treated as corps in the game. And the brigades are treated as divisions because they're exactly the same size. I mean, you're talking about a unit with 28 battalions in it at a time when the standard German division only had 9. So
right.
Yeah, and then the Romanians like to operate as brigades, and they had about 23 divisions, but they really deployed in about 78 brigades. But they were maybe a bit too clever for their own good, and you see it in the game because they tried to do a lot of maneuver, and they ended up really on extended fronts. And then when the Germans come in later with their full divisions, it's really tough for a Romanian brigade to hold up against a German division in a concentrated mode.
Right.
Yeah, and then the Austrians have their own thing. They're kind of a mess at this point because you're seeing a lot of the remnants of the Brussels offensive that got moved to this front. A lot of understrength divisions, a lot of divisions that were just cobbled together from these different, what were they, replacement battalions and what they called field battalions, which were just replacement battalions they decided to put in the field. And then you've got the Russians on the northern end with pretty much the same structure they had in 1914. These really big 16 battalion divisions sitting quietly on the northern part of the front. We can look at a map a little bit later and take a look at that.
So you've done all the research, so you know each of these divisions and brigades kind of intimately now. Is that reflected in the unit values, that like Brigade A is going to be very different than Brigade B, etc.?
Yeah, they're all different. All of them are different. The spreadsheet is 6 or 7 books long, and every unit was calculated down to the number of machine guns, down to the battalions and whether they're active or reserve, or and the Romanian side, they really go down to the level of militia. And one of the big problems the Romanians have as well, and this is well documented if you read any books on the campaign, was they expanded from 15 divisions to 23. And that was a huge mistake because what they basically did is they took active duty battalion or brigades and mixed in basically militia battalions. And you end up with this, I don't know what you would call it, this hodgepodge of mediocre units across the board.
Right. It waters down the better units. So you've got just kind of mediocre units across the board instead of some good units and some, you know,
Yes.
green units. Right.
Yeah, and most of these in the worst units were concentrated in the south against the Bulgarians because they were seen as being in a defensive role in the beginning. And of course, Mackinson was in the south, one of probably the best leaders of the war. And as soon as the war kicked off, within 3 or 4 days, he had the Bulgarians going across the border. And the Romanians were really just caught flat-footed because those units in the south are such poor quality, and they're defending against fairly good units. The Bulgarians were pretty competent.
So, you said you explained a few of the difference between what things are like on the Romanian front than compared to the Western front that we see in the previous game, in what I guess we're going to call a series now. What's the differences in terrain like on the Romanian front?
Yeah, well, I mean, a big portion of it is mountain. Should we take a look at
Yeah.
the map? Yeah, should we do
Yeah,
that?
well, I'll get there. We go.
Yeah, let's see. I don't know if we can't really zoom out. Grant, should I bring up the other? I tell you what.
Yeah, yeah. You go ahead and see if you can bring up just a view of the. You have a view of the whole map, yeah?
I do, and I've
Yeah.
even got the units on it. How's that?
There we go.
Let me move it a little bit so I can see. I think I can move it so I can see you.
I think it should be. Can you see me now?
Perfect.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Oh.
so there's the whole map. So this is that. Is it? I'm just going to guess. Is this going to mean it looks like about a 2-map game, then maybe two
Yeah,
sections that are both 2 by 3 feet roughly.
yeah, that's right. So when I designed it, I wanted it to fit on 2 standard map pages.
Yeah, perfect.
And so the sizes in Europe are different. So this is kind of interesting. So one of the first things Patrick told me is he said, "Don't worry about that because they're using different size paper." And so it's a bit bigger, but the playtest map is blown up even further. I'd say it's 20 to 30% bigger, but it should. I hope it will fit on everybody's table, and it will be 2 maps unless Patrick makes the decision to make it into more sections.
Right.
It might depend on what he thinks is best with making some maps for some smaller scenarios and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, he's done that in other games for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So here's the map. This is great that we're going to look at this because I think probably even really experienced World War I gamers probably haven't spent a lot of time looking at the Romanian front. So sort of tell us what we're looking at here and kind of where the front lies.
Sure. Let me see. I think if I move here, you kind of see my cursor, but I'll explain it as well. So these are the Carpathians, of course, a mountain range, not so high. I think the highest point is around maybe 2,300 meters or so, but they get a lot of snow, mostly in the beginning of the year, January, February or so. And on the other side of that, here's Transylvania, which at this point was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this was the area that the Romanians were going to eventually advance into from here at their starting points here at basically at the top of the mountains here.
Right. The Romanians are in the blue.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the Romanians are blue. The Austrians are kind of a dark gray. The Germans are field gray. It's kind of hard to see at this size, but
Right.
there's some
Yeah.
Germans up here. These are the Russians, the
Right.
like pea green color.
The green. Yeah.
And then here are the Bulgarians. Down here are the like the tan, the
Right. Yeah. Kind of
tobacco
brown
brown,
down there.
they
Yeah.
call it. Yeah.
So
Um,
the Romanians are in a, it's almost like a, a weird bulge, sort of salient looking uh, spot there. They've got people below them, above them. It
they do.
doesn't look good.
Yeah, it's a really good point in that if you measure it all the way around here, it's about 1,700 kilometers, and that was something that the chief of staff of the Russian army pointed out was that the Romanian front that they were covering was almost as long as all of the rest of the Eastern Front.
Right.
And they're trying to cover this with 23 divisions. But on the other hand, basically down here with the Danube in the south, you've got Serbia here, then
Yep.
Bulgaria over here. There are no bridges at all. So there are no bridges. There's only one here at Chernovoda,
Oh,
which
way over there. Yeah.
yeah, which the Romanians blew up anyway as the campaign progressed. But there's 700 kilometers with no bridge. Um, so, but there are crossing points, of course. Um, and the Danube had been crossed numerous times before, most recently, I think in 1878, when the Russians were fighting down here and they crossed the Danube. And they used a lot of the same crossing points in this campaign as well. Okay, so obviously the darker colors, the darker the color, gray is alpine. That
Right.
means
Yep.
that's over 2,000 meters, and then you have high mountain, low mountain, medium, and the tannish color is rough terrain, and then the green is the extensive forests that they had in this area. Rail lines, roads. This differs from Nakfaris in that there are roads. We felt, or I felt, I needed to show this because the road network isn't as extensive, of course, as Western France.
Yeah. It's a, I mean, it's a, you have a look at it and it's just so completely different. Just the fact that it's this loop of a shape that, I mean, it's, we're used to thinking of these long, not completely straight, but sort of straight lines that, bisecting the continent. But this is, I mean, I look at this and I'd go, I'd hate to be the Romanians.
Yeah, it's interesting. The game causes a lot of tension, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. But whoever plays the Romanian, of course, you feel a little bit, you're surrounded here basically. Well, you are literally
Yeah,
surrounded.
literally.
Other
Yeah.
than with your Russian allies, which aren't always the most dependent ally, or not the most trusty allies at different times as well. But even as the Bulgarians, so you can see there's, I think altogether there's maybe 10 or 15 Bulgarian counters, and with those you're supposed to conquer the Dobroja, so this whole area here. And I remember the first time I set this up, the first time I ever looked at it, I just looked at the map and I said, how in the heck am I ever going to conquer this big, huge area with these few guys? So for the Bulgarians, it's a tense situation. As you can see, for the Austrians, there's very few units. There's just different battalions and regiments stretched along the front lines here. They're a little bit more dense up here. This is the
Right.
Austrian Seventh Army. They were
That,
defending against. This is where Brusilov's southern part of the offensive reached in
that's
the
a
late
that
summer.
part is the only part that looks even a little bit like the Western Front with the, you know, every what are they, 8 kilometers or 8 miles or 10 miles, that like there's a unit everywhere. That down at the bottom, it's really interesting to see how much space there is, and you go, oh my god, I got to conquer all this space. But the defender also doesn't have many units to hold that space, so it,
No,
I mean, it just looks so wide open.
it is. It's and Lionel and I have talked a lot about this. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here.
Oh, great.
Lionel and I have talked about that. It's more like the Balkan War than it is the First World War.
Right, right.
As you can see, so these are actually battalions here, and you can see that, like in this sector, this is the Austro-Hungarian 72nd Division. This is all of it. This is all of it. These are gendarmes, and then these
And do
are
those are those the sort of red up and downy things? Is that represent fortresses or
these these are army boundaries.
no oh the
Yeah, do you mean
oh no,
these
not
here?
those. I mean the red, like they look like little squares going up and down and up and down and up and down. Yeah, through there.
Yeah, these are entrenchments.
Entrenchments. I think that's what it looked like. I couldn't figure out if it was going to be like a trench lines or actual fortresses or what was going on. But there's a lot of them.
Well, and the ones that are on the map were the ones that were dug by both sides in the period of 14 to 16. So there are a lot of them. These are treated differently than the ones that the units dig during the game, but
Right.
these were quite extensive. And the Austrians had made what they called the Maros line here, and it covers all the way from here all the way to here. And it was supposed to go
Wow.
all the way up here, but they didn't have the manpower to complete it. But they had been working on this for over 2 years or 2 years exactly, when Romania entered the war. So there are a lot of entrenchments.
Yeah. In terms of time, how much? What is one turn?
So each game turn
Yeah,
is two days.
2 days.
2 days, and of course there's 2 player turns within the game turn, and then every 3 turns there's a strategic phase. And in this strategic phase, you have some things happening, like you get more ammunition, you do the rail movement, you bring in the
Right. Okay.
reinforcements and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm totally getting a sense of it now. We have 10 miles per hex, 2 turns per day, and we're looking at brigades and divisions basically.
Yeah, brigades and divisions, other than the Austrians in the beginning, which are a lot of, but this is a special case. These battalions that are stretched like this. The initial plan was, the guy who was controlling what is his name? Arts was the Austrian general that was in charge of this area of, I'll zoom out a little bit, of defending Transylvania. And the original plan is that they wanted to fall back to the Marostellum. They wanted to come back here.
Right, to the line you pointed out before.
Yeah, and they said we're gonna do that. And then basically Ludendorff and Hindenburg told them, no, we really, really don't want you to do that. What we want you to do is disperse these 3 divisions and fight as battalions and slow down the Romanians. So that's exactly what they did. So instead of abandoning this border area, they fought in this area.
So
And
we're going to see a lot of fighting in the low mountains.
yes, exactly. And basically, it'll be the Romanians in the initial part of the game. The Romanians kind of pushing the Austrians out of the way, and them slowing them down as they can. And
Can you zoom in so that we can have a look at a little closer look at some counters there?
yeah, I'm not, how is it clear enough, because it is an
Yeah.
image. What I can do,
Nope.
or I can share.
No, that's good. I can totally see it. Yeah, this is going to be fine. We have we look at the ones in the center there. We see like 5 and 50 across the bottom, and we 32, 9, 5 across the top. So there's a lot of numbers on these counters. Why don't you let us know what's going on here?
Yeah, they were busier before, believe it or not.
Well,
Okay,
they're obviously infantry. So what are the numbers? I'm assuming those 12s refer to that's the unit number.
So the unit numbers are across the top. So
Oh, those are okay.
This is the 5th Division, 10th Regiment. Here, or sorry, 10th Brigade, 8th Regiment. This is the 5th
Regiment. Yep.
Division, 9th Brigade, 32nd Regiment. 5 is the CBF. This is combined the combat factor. 50 is the movement. C is the rating of the unit. So A is good, B, C,
And
not
is
so
that like
very.
a sort of a morale type thing, or just a proficiency?
It's more proficiency. The cab, which is the ability here on this side, the combat ability, is more like morale, if you want to call it that. So
Right.
higher numbers are good, lower numbers are bad. I have to tell you, within game terms, 11 is quite low. 11 isn't very good, but this is where this complex order of battle kind of comes into it, and every unit was rated down to the level of, okay, this regiment had two ersatz battalions, and it had one march battalion and one active battalion, and it would come up with, let's say, like a cab of 15, which is good, where this one would have an 11. They're all rated individually.
Right.
They're all
Right.
rated individually. Um,
And then
and
those sort of morale or cab numbers, are they more important on defense then, like the
on both, I would say.
on attacking as well?
Yeah, because depending on the results that you get on the CRT, you have to roll a cab check, and if you fail, then any number of actions you can decide what you want to do. You can, as the attacker, you have less options, of course. You either can take the first loss is a disruption, or sometimes it's a mandatory step loss. By the way, the the circles here are the number of steps in the unit.
Ah,
If there's none, it's one step, and then it starts
yep.
with two. And so these are all really small units, and
Yeah,
so
totally fragile. Yeah.
yeah, so these are really different in that I believe, I don't want to say something out of turn, but I don't think there's any units of this size in Paris at all. I think
Right.
most of the ones, there may be a couple of regiments, I can't speak for sure, but most of them are brigades, sorry, and divisions, of course. Yeah, and
And
you have
on the
yeah,
upper left, the uh, PZZG6.
yeah.
What are we looking at with that unit? Is that like a railroad unit, or is
It's
that
an
an armor unit, or
it's an armored train.
armored
Yeah,
train? That was going to be my guess, but I was too
yeah.
chicken to put it out there. But the fact that it was sitting on the rail lines there, I thought, is that one of those armored trains? That's fantastic.
Yeah, this is Panzerzug 6 or 6, and the Austrians used them quite extensively and fairly effectively. I mean, the Romanians did catch some of them, and they captured one or two, and they destroyed one. I know that, but in the early part of the game, they're pretty important because what we want to do too is we want to also implement fog of war. And so when you're seeing this, it's pretty easy to say, okay, well, this guy's 2, and I've got a 5 here, and another 5 and a 3.
Right.
What we want to do is for this all to turn over, and then the only thing you're going to be seeing are the symbols on the back until you're actually engaged, so that there are some units called patrols, which are basically 1 strength units that can sit out in this area, and they represent detached units. We have dummy units as well, so that maybe when you're looking here, you don't know that this is a real unit, and maybe it's a dummy here and a dummy here, because there was a lot of uncertainty, of course,
Right.
on
Right.
what was in front of them. Yeah,
Oh, that's fantastic. I love seeing fog of war in operational scale games.
sure.
We see so much of it in tactical games, but you don't always see a ton of it the farther up the scale you go.
Yeah, and we're still working on that. There's still one or two aspects we haven't finished. We have the air game. Well, it's not an air game. It's not that extensive. The air system or aspect of the game, fog of war, and we're working on the mission and leadership rules, because we feel there needs to be a way to reflect some of the personalities of the army commanders, because they had a huge effect on the campaign, and so we're working out how we can do that. That is,
Oh, that
they're not. We don't want stupid rules, because gamers, of course, hate those.
yeah, yeah.
But we do need to show the influence, and a big influence some of these commanders played during the campaign.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that idea. It, there's I can't if you zoomed out. Yeah, no, I think I no, I think we've seen what we need to see here. It's
Sure.
so yeah, there and the little chunk on the Black Sea there. Is there anything? Do we have? Is there any like naval component that happens along there?
Yeah, there is. So the Russian Black Sea Fleet was very, very active in this area, and I don't know if it's on the map. There was I'm not sure if it's here or not. Um, yeah, there's this is really just eye candy, but it's so there's also a German seaplane unit here in Varna. Yeah, so there is a naval aspect, but it's very limited. It's very
Right. Yeah.
limited
Of course. That makes sense.
because the only thing the Russians really did was, well, they bombarded Varna, but they provided gunfire support to this what would be the Allies' left flank as they advanced or retreated along the Dobrozha here. There are there are river fleets here, the monitor fleets, and they move up and down, and each side's got one. There's one Russian, one Romanian, one Austro-Hungarian, and they played a pretty important part because when the Romanians actually tried to cross here, and so when the Bulgarians were up here, the Bulgarians and Germans were up in this area. The Romanians crossed here, and the strategic plan or the big plan was to swing in behind here and cut them all off and destroy this whole army. But the Romanians built their pontoon bridge here across the Danube, and the Austrian monitor fleet flotilla came up and actually pretty much shot it full of holes.
Right.
So they rebuilt it a couple of times, and then finally, I think their nerves were shot, and the Romanian high command said, "Okay, let's get everybody back across," and that was pretty much it.
So it's so we have like river boat action. Like there's a part of this that's like I feel like there's a link to the previous century uh, with the American Civil War. Some of the monitor action or the gunboat action we saw there, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, you could call Turtukaya here the Vicksburg of this area, but yeah, this was a fortification here that the Romanians highly regarded. They thought they called it sometimes they called it Verdun on the Don or on the Danube, sorry, and they but actually the Bulgarians stormed it 2 or 3 days after they went across the border, and the Romanians end up losing the better part of two whole divisions in there, which was a really bad way for their campaign to start. So, yeah,
So well, we've had a good look at the counters and
yeah,
the map and whatnot. I'll get us back on the screen here, but I did also want to ask in terms of the mechanics, like the sequence of play. We're obviously looking at a good kind of old school hex and counter game. Is there chit puller or I go you go or what's the? I haven't played Knock Paris, so I'm a little behind the eight ball.
it's more. I would say it's I go, you go. We talked about just over the last couple of weeks whether we wanted to try some type of activation system, but the problem we ran into, Grant, and especially at this operational level, is you can really throw the campaign off if somebody really gets unlucky or unlucky. It would I we really felt that it would throw the game off to the point where it's not it isn't even that campaign anymore.
Oh, fair
Um,
enough. I have no problem
yeah.
with I go you go. I play a lot
Yep.
of those.
It was something we talked about a lot because we talked about breaking up the game turns a little bit, and we even talked about just one activating by army. This also had some complications, and the the turn segments or the player segments within the turns are pretty established. And if we start randomizing them, we found that it threw off a lot of stuff with the logistics, which is a fairly big part of the game. And so we kind of dallied or looked at this, we explored it, we talked about it, and then we went back to basically I go, you go.
All sounds good. Then my next question is, you hinted at the fact that there might be some. There's obviously going to be the full campaign game, but there might be some smaller scenarios included as well.
Yes.
Have you got those designed? Do you know how many there's going to be or how it's going to work?
Well, there's 5 scenarios now, and I think we'll easily be able to make 10.
Wow.
I made one just the week before last, which I think only has 10 counters in it, and it only lasts 2 turns. So
Right.
we want a learning scenario. The Bulgaria attack scenario only covers that southern part of it, but it's longer. It goes from the beginning of September until mid-October. So yeah, so you're talking 6 weeks at 2 days per turn. But we want to make some other smaller ones, like with the initial Romanian advance. And so I'd say at least 10 scenarios.
Oh, that's great. So if you're playing the whole campaign game, how long do you think that takes? I mean, do you have any idea? Is it a week?
Yeah,
Can you do it in a weekend or?
the rest of your life, probably. No, okay, I'll be honest with you. So I'll say when we tested, and this is, of course, this is apples and oranges. When we played the campaign game when it was the 1914 system, and we did test it at a couple of conventions, I would say we played about 8 or 9 turns in a day or a day and a half. So it would take you longer than that. It would, and
Right.
we're talking 8-hour convention days, really playing a lot. Um, it would take a long time because it covers from the end of the end of August through the 1st of January.
Right. So
And
most players are going to play scenarios unless you've got a buddy where, hey, we're going to leave this set up on the ping pong table for 2 months and we're going to, you know, play it when we can, that sort of thing.
or if you play on Vassal,
Or
and
Vassal, yes, of course.
that's why one of the reasons why we put as much work as we have into the Vassal module. It's fully functional. It's nice that on the counters you can do all of the functions. You
Yeah.
can track the ammunition points. You can track disruption, field works, all of it. Well, because for one thing, we want to use it for testing, but the other is we understand if somebody's playing the campaign game, we want to expedite it, make it more efficient. And yeah.
I play 80% of my gaming is Vassal, and one of the best things about, well, the two best things, the one thing about not having to use something set up and being able to come and go with it is fantastic. But something else you just hinted at, the way that games that may on the table have quite a few information markers
Mhm.
on Vassal, there's different ways of doing that where it can just be like a tiny overlay and you're not messing around with markers, giant stacks of markers on top of your units.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, we tried to make the physical copy of it that you're not dealing with the masses of markers, but there are markers. I mean,
Yeah,
it's unavoidable. It's
totally.
especially in operational games. I don't know. That seems to kind of be the sweet spot for, you know, different information markers and stuff like that. But yeah, we've got some.
So how far along are you? When do you think that this game is going to be available to the public?
Well, so it's I keep hearing this quote of 80% done. I don't know if I can put a number on it like that. But it's quite far along. We definitely so we had we put out our first draft copy of the rules in the beginning of July. And now we're getting ready to put out version, I think it's 1.02. So after some updates, I think honestly, I think maybe sometime in spring next year. The original goal, I'll be very transparent. The original goal was we're doing a playtest next month on Vassal over a weekend, and we wanted to try to submit it after that, but we're not going to make it.
Right,
We're not going
right.
to make it. It's not going to be ready. It's going to be spring of next year, and part of that is just the human factor. We're all working. I've had to slow things down, so I would really say a lot of it's on my part. We have some family things going on and working full time. Um, when we play tested in April in person, and it went really, really, really well. We had a really great play test. So we really buckled down and we got basically we went from draft sections of the rules to an entire rule book from April to the 1st of July, the end of April to the 1st of July. And that involved a lot of 4 o'clock in the morning days, getting up, working for 2 or 3 hours before going to work. And I really that's not maintained. At least for me, that's not sustainable. I
Right.
can't do it indefinitely. So I think spring. I think spring
Well,
of next year.
I think every as eager as gamers are for their favorite games to be released, they're more eager for the games to be done properly than rushed. So,
Yeah.
spring is it's not going to disappoint anybody that much if it means less errata and a better game, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Lionel and I have really worked on it. Lionel has done a fantastic job of going through and re-going and going through again with fine-tooth comb to try to find everything that we've missed. Um, it's just I I would say if I've learned one thing, the biggest thing I've learned is how much work making a game like this is. It's absolutely, and I'm not joking, it's a lot more work than doing a PhD, and I'm not joking at all.
Well, you
It
dove in at the in a sort of in the deep end of the pool here, though, too.
is.
Uh,
Yep. Well,
well,
yeah,
go ahead.
that was my choice. That's true.
Right, because you had this great interest in this campaign. So I think the last thing I want to ask you about is once this is all done, can you imagine yourself designing another game? Like, are you going to, are you happy to become a designer?
Yeah, I would do it differently. So I would say one of the reasons why this has taken me almost 10 years is because I've made a lot of mistakes and there were a lot of things I didn't know, a lot of things I would really have done differently. I would like to try another game. We've talked a lot about the Brussels Offensive, which is another underdone campaign, and it's exactly at the same time period. So basically, I'd have to ship the map north, make a map, and then as far as all the unit values and everything goes and the system, that's all done. And
Right,
I really think if we really dug into it, we could do the other game in less than a year. Easy,
right,
easy.
right.
Yeah.
All right, so you're set up for your next topic already.
Yeah, and I think it'll be a while. I mean, we by the time we get this done and get everything and then submit it, and I'm sure there'll be things that'll come back from VUCA. Um, their art guys will want to look at it as well, and they may do some cleaning up of some different stuff or have some suggestions. They do a really, really good job on their artwork, and
Oh, Luca's art is beautiful. Yeah,
they may have some different ideas than what you're seeing here.
right.
I mean, as far as functionality goes, the unit identification will have to be on it and everything, but it may be they want to rework some stuff. But yeah, I would be interested. I think also the Western Front in 1918 would be really, really interesting as well. Some people have asked about the Russo-Japanese War. The only thing with the Russo-Japanese War is if you want to cover the naval aspect of it, that's not something I'm an expert on at all.
Right.
But there's there's still a few good topics out there that haven't been done, though. Of course, Western Front 1918 has been done a lot, a little bit more. So
Right. Well, I that's great. It's been great to talk to you. I think we've got a really good sense of what the game's looking like, what it's going to be, and where it's at. Was there anything else you wanted to tell us before I let you go?
um, yeah, I just really would like to thank the people who have helped. I would really again like to thank Lionel. He's just been fantastic, and he is such a hard worker and just always tries to make himself available. I feel really lucky that he's involved in the project. Um, Federico Benitez is one of our playtesters, and he's just been really supportive from the very beginning as well. Always chipping in, trying to help out and stuff. And another thing I think I've learned is that you absolutely can't do anything like this by yourself.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and playtesting is tough. I'll tell
Uh,
you,
I
it's
totally agree. The
well,
unsung heroes of the hobby.
yeah, it is, and it is, and sometimes people get involved and then they have to drop out because of family and stuff, and especially when you've got a big game like this, a complex game and a big game like this, it's hard to get people into it and keep them into it without them having to fall out for other stuff. And
If
I
someone hasn't play tested before, they have no idea what a commitment it actually is. It's
yes,
not just playing a game once or twice, or it's not
yeah.
4 hours of commitment.
Yeah, and but that and it's also been a huge journey of discovery. I've really enjoyed. I mean, I've had people send me files from the archives in Russia. I've been to the German military archives in Germany. I've had some Romanian guys send me different books and files. I had a Russian guy in Moscow who I haven't heard from for a long time, but had sent me a lot of books before. I've met people from all these countries that are involved. And what I hope too with this is that it's fun, it's a game, but also maybe that it's a little bit of a memorial to all of the people involved in this campaign. And that includes the civilians and everyone else that was impacted by the war in this area. I mean, there's 6 different nationalities involved. It's and the Turks are there too. I forgot to mention them as well. But I hope it kind of stands a little bit as a memorial and maybe makes people a little bit more aware of what happened in this area.
Right. Yeah. There's no way it can't, because this is really, as you say, an undergamed area. So it's definitely going to be, well, like so many good games, it's going to be a bit of learning as well as gaming, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's actually, I think there's a lot of learning involved. And one of the things some of the players have mentioned, and this is a valid point, is I've heard a couple times, I have no connection to any of the sides in this game, and so we feel it's really important to have some learning scenarios because when you look at this and you look at these really big areas where there's no units at all, I think there's some paralysis that can kind of set in, especially if you're the Romanians and you say, okay, I've got these guys, but there's nobody for 10 hexes. What am I going to do? We want to make the smaller scenarios so that players can feel more familiar, and we're going to have a lot of historical notes as well, because otherwise I think you're going to have guys that just stare at the map and say, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with
Absolutely.
this.
Absolutely. If you don't, yeah, if you're not familiar with the history, you don't know what the first move, even if you don't want to make the same first move as they did in history, you want to at least know what you're avoiding.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a game that creates a lot of tension. It's very interesting when you play it, um, because there are so many empty spaces. And I think kind of the way it's even distributed, it makes gamers a little uncomfortable. Exactly what you said. You said, look at the north. That looks more like World War One. The rest of it doesn't. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that giant, I mean, it does, I mean, it just looks like a giant bulge, right? That's the spot that the Romanians are in. You're used to having people on your one border, not not your top border and your bottom border. That'd be
exactly.
like the U.S. being attacked by Canada and Mexico at the same time. It'd be crazy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And there's some pretty good guys on the central power side, the Hexa side. Whoops, sorry, the central power side. And we've often talked about that the Romanians couldn't have been more unlucky in the fact that they had Mackinson in the south, who was a super great field marshal and really good commander, and then they got Falkenhayn on the north, who was the former chief of staff who got fired, and he came here with something to prove,
Right.
and the sources all agree that he performed almost a flawless campaign. So you've basically got this hammer and this anvil with these two really good German commanders. It's it's tough for the Romanians, but they can do better. And what we have seen in the play testing is that they often do better than historically. So
Right.
that's
That's what you want to see.
yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having this conversation with me, Paul. And I'm sure, well, I don't know if we'll talk again. Maybe we'll talk again when it comes out, but I'm glad to let people know about this game. And get people ready and waiting for it when it comes out in hopefully this spring.
Thank you very much. And Grant, thank you. You're a gracious host. You made it so easy. I wasn't nearly as nervous as what we had talked about, and I really enjoyed it. And again, good luck to you on your show.
Thanks very much.
All right.
Talk about passion for a subject, right? Paul is a definite World War I specialist of the best sort. He was kind, gracious, and thoughtful, and really prepared for our conversation. I hope to run into him again later down the line. Okay. Game 2, Dance of War. While I was in Montreal a few weeks ago, I visited an excellent shop, Le Valet de Coeur. They have a pretty good war games section as part of a really comprehensive game shop. In it, I found a few games from a publisher I'd heard of but never seen, 3 Crown games from Sweden. I bought a couple of their games to try, so here's a look at the first one, Dance of War. This is a traditional hex and counter chit pull game on the first Battle of El Alamein in 1942. Designed by Paul Shackleton. The copyright date on the game says 2024, so I guess it's new, certainly new to me. I don't know if 3 Crowns does boxed games. The ones I saw were all Ziploc games, priced at $73 Canadian, which is currently about $53 US. The paper map is 23 by 33 inches, so pretty standard size. It's a great map with a calm palette and very clear terrain markings. The counters are laser cut, but none of that sooty detritus that sometimes come on laser cut counters. They are well laid out as well as with good colors, but they're just the tiniest bit less sharp than the printing on the map, a tiny quibble. The rule book is 16 pages, matte finish, full color, double column with a decently sized font size, easy to read, no illustrations, but plenty of written examples. The units in this game are generally battalion-sized with divisional HQ units that match the activation chits. That is, divisions get activated and you can generally move most of the battalions or brigades in that division, as well as a couple of independent units. There are a few brigades that have no activation chit of their own, but sort of share one, meaning that only one of those brigades will be activated when that chit is drawn. And then there's also army chits for each side where the owner can choose which division to activate. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this game. It's got many really standard features. The chit pull activation is much like games like Cells from Revolution or A Victory Lost from MMP. It's a traditional hex and counter map, so movement is familiar, as are zones of control. Combat is a classic odds-based CRT with step losses, generally only a single step or a retreat. Victory is a VP point affair. There's 19 victory point locations on the map. The Axis start with 5 of them, the Allies start with the other 14. But should note that the VPs awarded for each location is different for the two sides. El Alamein, for example, is worth 5 to the Axis if they take it, but only 1 to the Allies if they hold it. There is a reinforcement schedule that favors the Allies as time goes by, so the general flow of the game is for the Axis to push early and grab some extra VP locations, and then to try to hang on as the Allies push back. So far I've described a game that most hex and counter players will be familiar with. Dance of War, though, has a few things that make it its own thing. There's a random event table with a different set of possible events for each turn. That's a lot of events and a lot that aren't going to happen each turn. So I imagine this is going to also help with the replayability factor. The events are generally impactful, not just chrome. So they make a difference, maybe not decisive difference, but they're definitely not just little trifles. Each side also has a varying number of activations each turn, again like Cells. So even if the Axis have 8 chits in the cup, they may only get to use the first 3 chits pulled on a turn. It changes for each side from turn to turn. Similarly, there are small amounts of replacement steps available to each side, which vary from turn to turn as well. Supply is familiar. Units found to be out of supply have their capabilities reduced. If they are found to be out of supply again next turn, then they're marked as isolated and further restrained. However, they're never eliminated simply for remaining isolated. Another bit of chrome. There's special rules for the British 1st Armoured Division. Apparently it didn't have his act together throughout the engagement, so when its chit is pulled, you can move its 1 or 2 infantry units as usual, but you have to roll for each of the armoured units to see if it moves. As well, the 23rd Armoured Brigade was an untested unit, so for its values are unknown at the outset. It has 3 regiments. Whenever one of them is involved in its first combat, you roll to see what its strength's going to be, and then it uses that counter and strength for the rest of the game. There's also a bit of air support for each side. There's boxes and minefields, some from the start of play, some others that are built later on. All the stuff you think of when playing in the desert. I have to say, I really enjoy playing this game. I love World War II North Africa games, as you probably know, so I was inclined to like it anyway, but this one didn't disappoint. There's a ton of room to maneuver, though the 2 sides really do start out almost on top of each other. The CRT is not particularly bloody, so units aren't evaporating. I'm a big fan of chit pull games, and at this scale, it doesn't feel like it wrecks the historical narrative. The desert battles were swirling affairs. I don't think it makes a big difference to history when the order of activations is all mixed up. And who knows what the order of activations really should be anyway, right? One of the things that grabbed me the most was the familiarity of it all. It made learning it a breeze. And then, on the other hand, the thing that was less familiar was the random events table, and I just found it really intriguing. I'm sure that a second play is going to be very different from my first, just due to the different events. And I've always liked the chit pull system where you aren't guaranteed to get all your chits every turn. So I haven't seen this on the shelves where I am. If you're like me, you check out the 3 Crowns website. There's a link, of course, in the notes in the newsletter. And I should mention, I did a quick and dirty playthrough video of it, of 1 turn of it, as I mentioned earlier. So if you want to see it in action, it's on my YouTube channel. Check it out there. Newbie tips. Well, my well of newbie tips has dried up. I'm sure I'll think of more down the road, but if you've got a tip you'd like to share, please email me at grant@pushingcardboard.com or reach me at our Discord server. Let me know what you'd like to pass along. I'd be happy to add any tips that don't come from my brain. Parting shots. Well, here I'd like to give a shout out to Russ Gifford and his website, spigames.net. As you might expect, it's a website devoted to all things SPI, so it covers everything they did from 1969 to 1982. It indexes all the games, all the quads, all the monster games, all the magazines. It lists all the variants, and it has an opponent finder service if you're stuck looking for someone to play your oldies with. And there's a ton of stuff on the history of SPI, from the chronology of the releases to the myriad ways SPI packaged their products. I'm a sucker for this sort of history of the hobby, so if you are as well, I recommend you check it out. I have to say the website looks a bit like it was designed in 1990 and never updated, but it's still the content that makes all the difference. There's still blog posts being made as I write this. The most recent post on SPI Games.net is from September 2024, so it's still current. I don't know Russ Gifford. I think I remember his name from when I was first playing ASL online in the early 90s. Maybe he was part of the Genie ASL group or the ASL mailing list that we had on Usenet. In any case, I appreciate what he's done to keep the history of SPI available. Finally, thanks again to those who've become supporters of Pushing Cardboard. I'm really enjoying making these podcasts, but I have to admit the costs do add up. Setting aside the money spent on gear and software, which is considerable, there's $140 a year for web hosting, $140 a year for hosting the podcast files, and then I was paying $100 a year for the site to host the site I use to host online interviews, which I do quite a few of. But these buggers have raised my fee from $100 a year to $430 a year. It's just crazy. I mean, of course, I'm looking for a more reasonable alternative, and I'll afford it all, however it works out. But if you're all interested in becoming a supporter, now's the time to do it. Go to pushingcardboard.com and click on the supporter menu page. I'll really appreciate it. But if you're not if you can't afford it or not interested, that's fine too. I'll keep making them, and you can keep downloading them. That's all good. Anyway. That's it for another episode of Pushing Cardboard. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe and all the other YouTube things. And if you're listening to the podcast, look for the newsletter with links to everything I've already talked about lately. And whether you're listening on audio or watching on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, just go to the website. It's easy to sign up to the newsletter. One comes out for every issue, and it has all these links in it. Anyway, that's that. Until next time. Keep your stick on the ice. Hey, hockey season has arrived.